We are live.
Hi, friends.
Okay, you guys, I'm going to introduce us in here. So I'm Megan. I'm one of the co-owners of Fae Crate, and we have an awesome lineup of authors today for our LGBTQ and YA panel. So we're going to introduce them and say a little bit about each of their latest books or series, just so you know a little bit if you're not familiar with one of the authors, and then we will go from there with questions. Brittany?
Oh, and I'm Brittany, the other co-owner of Fae Crate. And I'm going to start with Mackenzi. Mackenzi Lee is the author of The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, and the Montague Siblings Series in total. The newest one comes out soon, September. And it's Gentleman's Guide to Scandals and Shipwrecks. Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue is the first in that series. It is an 18th century grand tour, goes exquisitely wrong. 18-year-old white Viscount Henry Montague is known for his dashing looks as his penchant for booze and boys. Before his abusive father grooms him to run the estate, he and his best friend Percy are sent on a year-long grand tour, after which he and Percy will likely be separated forever. And I apologize for the man who just started mowing my lawn.
I'm just not totally sure, like, where to look or what to do with my hands while you're reading about my book.
Splutter. Next, we have MK England. They are the author of The Disasters and Spellhacker, which was also in our January crate. A little bit about Spellhacker. It's a close-knit team of magic thieves attempt one last job only to uncover a dangerous conspiracy. Science fiction melds with fantasy in the futuristic city of Kirkarta,
close enough.
Okay. I was like, oh man, they're going to put that on me on live, where people use both advanced technology and magical energy called Maz. So this was awesome. And next we have
Reverie by Ryan Sala, who is dressed as a sexy pterodactyl for us today. Reverie is a teenager fighting to keep a series of baroque fantasy worlds from tearing his reality apart. Something terrible happened to Kane Montgomery at the old mill in Connecticut, his Connecticut hometown. Or did he do something terrible there? But with his memory of the night gone, even he couldn't tell you what. Now, Kane has to prove that he's stable enough to go back to school, a task definitely more difficult by visions of spider-like monsters and mysterious encounters with a glamorous, overtly queer person named Dr. Posey.
Oh, I like that description. Thank you.
Okay, so first off, we have kind of questions that all three of you can answer, and then we will separate into our one-on-one questions. So our first question is one that we're asking a lot of our authors is, what would your main characters be doing during quarantine? So how do we want to start it off, MK?
Sure, why not? I think the main character of Spellhacker, Diz, she is the hacker of title fame. And whenever she is left to her own devices, she inevitably gets into trouble, usually of some kind of illegal internet variety. Her insomnia hobby is basically digging up dirt on everybody around the city. So I'm sure she would be just sitting in her house compiling giant files of all the embarrassing things about every public figure that she doesn't like. Because what else are you going to do?
That's my insomnia hobby, too. I get that.
I love it.
Okay, Mackenzie?
Okay, mine's weird. Is this like are they modern or are they historical?
Whatever you'd want.
I was like, are they living today during the quarantine, or is this like some plague situation in the 15th century? I think Percy would be fine. He's a little bit more of an indoor cat than Monty. Monty would be climbing up the walls, just like going out of his mind, not being able to leave the house, and not being able to like socially interact with people. You'd have to like duct tape him to the wall or something.
I love that.
Right.
So the main character of Reverie, Kane, is like pathologically introverted. Like he just really does not like other people, and a big part of the book is like him trapping himself in fantasy worlds. People have asked me what he would be up to during a quarantine, and I like regrettably have to inform you, I don't think he'd notice. Like his life would not be interrupted in any significant way, which is mostly because like his life is like he does everything in his power to kind of get away from other people and distract himself with like books and escapism. So probably once he did notice, he would probably feel pretty good, because he also does experience a lot of FOMO because he like knows that his behaviors aren't really socially constructive. But like him, I haven't been feeling that much FOMO, and it's been like a really great release from like the regular anxiety that I'm like not doing enough. So I don't know. I think that he might actually find like kind of that silver lining and dwell within that.
I really identify with that. Thank you.
Do you?
Yeah. I'm not sure I would have noticed if kids weren't here too. So I'm just like, wait, there are other people.
That's not a healthy behavior.
I think my thing, I've identified with this one photo that's been popping up that said, I was an introvert before this, but now people are telling me I have to stay home, and I have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. I'm just too stubborn and like to take advice from anybody, so I want to like march around, even though I shouldn't.
I want to co-sign everyone in your Facebook comments saying Monty would be into Zoom happy hours, and probably also would like, he would probably already be on TikTok, but I'm imagining Monty would spend a lot of time like trying to do TikTok challenges unsuccessfully with Percy in the background. So that's
like Monty would try to do them and maybe not be the best, but then Percy would be better at them, but not try.
I like there's the one on TikTok right now of where you like do the handstand against the wall and do
the door.
Yeah. I like the idea of Monty trying that while Percy's just reading in the background.
That's cute. That's nice. That's like a Hallmark movie, but like 10 years from now, looking back at right now.
You're disastrous Hallmark.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you guys had to describe your book in one sentence, what would that be? Who wants to go first?
One sentence is hard. There will be excessive punctuation.
Yeah. Get those semicolons out.
Run-on sentences are fun.
Okay. Hacker girl who can't actually talk about feelings at all thinks one last heist will somehow fix all of her problems and keep all her friends from leaving her. M dash. Which goes about as well as you'd think.
That was good. That was good.
The M dash was good. A good touch.
It's my favorite. My favorite punctuation.
I've been like debating whether I should say this. This is the nerdiest thing. No one's gonna know this reference, but there was this pianist / stand-up comedian named Victor Borgia, and he had this like okay, kind of. I'm just like, does anyone know this reference? This just made me think of MK though, because he has this routine he would do where he would read things, he would read the punctuation but have like sound effects for them. So like he would say a sentence and then when it ended with a period, he'd just go, and it was really, really funny. I'm imagining for an M-dash like a slide noise, like like something. So if anyone
the strangest pitch ever.
I
didn't know that
signing books whenever there's punctuation. There's always like noises that go along with it. I've tried to stop. I cannot actually stop. It's very awkward.
Perfect.
All right, who's it? Ryan, would you like to give it a shot?
Mackenzie, you gotta do our sounds with the.
Which way do I point at Ryan? I don't know if I'm showing the same way as.
You're this. Wait, hold on. I can't. Oh, we're reversed.
There.
You're this way. Okay, there we go. So so Reverie is a story about Kane Montgomery, who's a young, queer, introverted kid that has to contend with reality when a maniacal drag queen sorceress decides to stage her takeover of reality, starting with his small Connecticut town.
Also very good.
There.
No
M dashes.
Okay, my turn. Sorry, I just had to like belch quietly after drinking Diet Coke. Great at these. This is why every time I get asked by a publisher to record, they're like, "Can you just do a 30-second video saying hi to your readers?" And I'm like, "Sure, that'll take no time at all. And then like 4 hours later, I'm like, what is happening? There are 8,000 takes of it. Me saying that F word. So is it's one word, which is just like shenanigans. It's a 18th century road trip about two young men on their grand tour of Europe who, nope, I want to start this sentence over. I panicked halfway through. It's about a young man named Monty who's living in the 18th century in England. He's about to go on his grand tour of Europe, which a grand tour, if you don't know, is that's my M dash. Grand tour, if you don't know, is
parenthetical.
Yeah, parentheses. If you were like a young rich white guy in the 1700s and you had this awkward period of time between finishing school and then you had to wait for your dad to die so that you could take over all his estate and his money. Often how you would kill some of that time would be to travel all over the continent of Europe, and you were supposed to like see sights and go see art and learn languages and things, but you were also kind of supposed to like sow your wild oats and maybe like drink yourself sick a couple of times and get that all out of your system. So Monty's really looking forward to that element of his story, the latter element. He's traveling with his best friend Percy. This isn't a sentence anymore. This is a paragraph.
I would like to see how this comes out.
Secretly in love with, and also his little sister Felicity, who he thinks is a big drag. And because it's a book, everything goes off course, and there's a possibly magical artifact that they come into possession of that makes them the targets of a manhunt across 18th century Europe.
Deep breath.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. I'd like to see that actually written down to see what happens with that.
Someone could diagram that sentence for us.
Okay, so out of any of your books, for those of you that have more than one, who was your favorite character to create and why? Who's prepared for this one first?
I'll start.
All right.
So I really loved writing Monty, and I think part of why is because Monty came from a place of like real joy and fun for me. So after my first book came out, which is called This Monstrous Thing, which is wildly unread. It was like not a very popular book, and it's still not a very popular book. And so I had this sort of like weird adjustment period of trying to figure out how to be a professional writer and how to like commodify your art when nobody's reading it and nobody's buying it. And it's not like, it's having a book come out is so weird because it's one of those things where like your whole world changes and nobody else's does. And it's a very strange, isolating experience. I was trying to write with everything feeling very backwards, where I felt like I was starting with an agent and then an editor and like 5 fans, as opposed to the opposite, where before I'd always felt like I'm going to write whatever I want and then throw it at the wall and see if it sticks. And so everything just felt really backwards. I was dealing with all sorts of weird, like depression about not understanding how to be a professional artist. And I was trying to write this book for the second book in my contract. It's the only reason I had a second book is because they were dumb and gave me a 2-book deal. And the first one didn't sell very well, which is the only reason I got a second book. Anyways, so I was trying to write the second book in my 2-book deal. And it was about like steelworks in Chicago at the turn of the century, and everybody had cholera and was like missing limbs. And like I was sad, and everything I was reading about made me sad, and the book was making me sad, and I was just miserable trying to write it. And so I kind of gave myself permission to start working on a side project that I told myself nobody would ever read. Like legitimately, I did not think anyone would ever read it. And so because of that, I gave myself permission that I was like, you get to be as ridiculous as you want. You get to put in every dumb fan fiction trope that you love so much, and every dumb adventure novel trope, and like nothing's too weird and nothing's too ridiculous, and just write this book for fun. And like, don't worry about pace, don't worry about craft, just fun. And so that's where Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue came from. And it was honestly just written from a place of like reminding myself how much I love writing and storytelling, and Monty's voice was so organic to the book, and it was sort of the first thing that was there. And he was just lots of fun to write because he's very audacious, and it's fun to write a character that's sort of that speaks his mind so freely.
Perfect.
Thank you to your friend who says
I'd like to second that. I have This Monsters Thing, and I read it and I loved it. So
I didn't really know about I don't know, when I sold it, I was like, this is going to be a huge hit. And then now I'm like, first of all, it's a Frankenstein retelling, which like really narrows your audience, because then it's only people who like Frankenstein. And I'm like, let me narrow it even further to steampunk, which is the most niche of all the genres.
The niche of niches.
So, yeah, the pitch being steampunk Frankenstein, it just like shrinks my audience. Right now.
Oh my goodness.
I really love what you say about writing that book from a place of joy, though, because it so shines through the pages. And I think that was one of the things that I found really difficult moving from my first book, The Disasters, to my second book, Spellhacker. Because my first book, The Disasters, was absolutely all of that for me. It was, you know, fun space tropes and, you know, running away from the authorities, and which I guess happens in every book I write. I don't know. I'm not going to psychoanalyze that. And, you know, it was just so steeped in all of the things that I loved. And then Spellhacker was much more like, let me deconstruct all of the messy things in my head and put them out in public. That's not embarrassing at all. So I think my favorite character to create from that book is actually the love interest, Remy. Partially because I just wanted they, them pronouns all over the page. Like every page needed to have they, them pronouns on him. Because this was the first book that I wrote since starting to use those pronouns myself. And so I just wanted them everywhere. And I also just wanted to write a love interest who like really would not put up with the main character's crap. And was like, look, I deserve better. Get it together, figure out how to communicate, you know, when you can respect me and have like a healthy relationship, come back to me. And I just really wanted to write a character who would not settle for anything less than like honest communication and respect, and like not deal with the main character, i.e. me as a teenager / young adult, and all of their like non-communicative blocking techniques. So yeah, there's an embarrassing amount of me and gross in that book.
Okay, I feel very called out in you talking about the love interest that won't settle for like any, because he was just like dragged along by Monty for years of like, I will continue to put up with this bullshit. And feeling very called out. No, it's fine.
Was the question, is it our favorite character or the one that we're most like? What was I forget what the original
favorite character to create and why?
Okay. So in Reverie, I think the reason the book got a lot of attention kind of early on was because the pitch contains the words like maniacal drag queen sorceress as like the villain. And I think that put like a lot of people's like hackles up, right? Like, a lot of queer people are sort of used to like the villainous queer trope. And to have a villain that was like, yeah, the villain is sort of like a drag queen, I think sort of fell within like the radar of people that were very worried about that. But to kind of circle back on why I wrote Posey the way that I did, when I was a young kid, drag queens sort of represented like queer power to me in a way that like I didn't really have access to myself, because I was a young like queer kid trying to experiment with like, you know, transforming my body and like costumes. I'm clearly still into dressing up. And when I looked at like the queer community, like drag queens were those people. And luckily my parents from a very young age would like bring me to drag shows because they knew that I was like really into it. And I really always would prioritize like respecting them and taking their craft seriously. And so when it came to writing Reverie, which is a story that's like a very deeply queer story, it's about like escaping from a reality that doesn't necessarily love you back and forming your own reality. When I was trying to think of like, well, who would have like a lot of umbrage towards reality, and further, who would take it upon themselves to transform it and to create something new, the answer like right away was like, oh, this would be a drag queen. Like I believe a drag queen to be able to do this. Like they've kind of got the like raw magic that I'm looking for here. And Posey is the drag queen's name in Reverie, and she sticks with her, she pronouns for most of the book because she's in drag for most of the book, but she's a fluid character, and getting to write like power into that identity and not necessarily have it curb towards somebody else's plot, even though they're the villain, being able to kind of give her a goal and also just give her like tons of magic to accomplish it and to sort of tear apart like this very heterosexual reality, and to also be vindicated in that. Like ultimately, I think people finish the book and realize like, oh, there's a lot of love written into this character, and perhaps villain is, you know, it's a punchy word to sell books, but ultimately like when I'm writing Posey, I have a ton of tenderness for, you know, her end goal. I think her means are a little bit too brutal for my taste. You know, she does sacrifice other people that she would otherwise want to recruit to her side if she wasn't so mercenary in her goals. But ultimately, writing her was a like tremendously cathartic thing for me, because as like the author who's creating like an escapist fantasy for like queer readers, like I really felt like she was sort of my avatar in the ring for a lot of the book.
I love that.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I'm just going to keep interrupting with inappropriate thoughts. I don't know
That's okay.
and I saw the Facebook quote. No, somebody says maniacal drag queen sorceress was the draw for me, which like obviously I read that without my glasses on because it has a similar shape to my name. I read that as Mackenzi drag queen sorceress.
Surprise, Mackenzi!
There's your sequel.
Oh my God.
I love that.
I had a very alarming moment where I was like, what am I
Awesome.
on today?
Thank you, whoever called out Ursula vibe. Thank you. I'm with you. Ursula's my favorite character in the book. My favorite, my personal favorite character. But yeah, she never gets enough love.
Never.
Never.
All right, Britt.
Moving on, name a character from a book that you most identify with as a person in the LGBTQ community, whether or not the character is explicitly stated as queer in the book.
Is this characters in our books or characters in any book?
Any book.
Or yours. Either one.
I have a quick answer for this, and I won't take up that much time. If it were my own book, Posey right away is sort of the person that I reach for, because they probably have the most of me in the way that they think and act and sort of perceive themselves. But recently I've been thinking about like kids books and queer characters in them, are like queer coded kids, and I have to say like the Rainbow Fish comes to mind as like not an explicitly queer character, but one that like I identified with because I held a lot of rage as like a little kid because I was being told like to kind of hide my eccentricities. And when I read the Rainbow Fish, I read it totally wrong. Not as like, oh, we've got this like selfish fish who's like haughty and like is not sharing their glow with other people. I was like, oh, they're literally tearing the scales off of this fish because they don't like how like flamboyant it is. And like that was my like favorite queer character from like a young age. And to this day, I really don't like that book because I feel like it did not end the way that I wanted it to.
I thought you had the I thought you were going to bring apart the Rainbow Fish as a symbolic representation of like the emotional labor queer people are required to
right, like peeled apart. Yeah,
the Rainbow Fish. That's interesting.
Yeah, I talk about it a lot.
I guess if I were to pick somebody from my own books, it would definitely be Remy, as like the person who represents me now, but like I like to reflect back on my terrible years as a teenager and young adult when I did not have my life together in any way, shape, or form and was just a mess. And Mackenzi, plug your ears because I'm going to talk about one of your characters and it's embarrassing. So when I read Ladies' Guide to Petticoats and Piracy, I really identified with Felicity, not necessarily in a queerness way, but in a like I was a bad feminist as a teen and like equated femininity with badness, and you know, because it was being forced on me, and so it became like a bad thing for anyone. And I just needed to learn a lot of the same lessons that I think Felicity did over the course of that book, over like how to support women and how to like be welcoming to all expressions. And yes, that includes people who love pink and dresses and stuff like that. That is totally valid. And you can't empower certain people over like certain women or certain expressions of femininity over others because they're more palatable to you. So yes, very identified with Felicity and her arc there.
I love that.
Me too.
That was an arc that came very directly from my own life as well, and having very similar experiences as a young person and having a very complicated relationship with the concept of femininity. At first, because I sort of assumed all, you know, because you see all the girls that are strong, quote unquote, in media are like strong because they have a sword and are wearing pants. And so for a long time, I sort of equated like to be strong, you have to take on these traditionally masculine roles. And that's the only way for women to be strong. And then I sort of, I think, kind of swung the other direction when I realized the opposite. And I was sort of like, well, women who decide to dress more androgynously or present themselves in a more masculine or androgynous way are disrespectful to feminism. And I think I've finally kind of landed hopefully somewhere in the middle in terms of just like the way I think about people and the way I think about other women and myself too, because all of this stuff that I think all the judgment we impose on other people reflects back on us. And I know like personally, whoa, this is going to get heavy. So much of my life has been just like unpacking all the like internalized homophobia I have that then reflects back at me. It's very weird. In terms of queer characters that I relate to, I actually, the character I'm going to pick is not like canonically a queer character, but I think the reading of her as a queer character is very easy, and there's a lot of material in the book, and that's Jackie Faber from the incredibly brilliant Jackie Faber series, which is by L.A. Meyer, and it's this series of I think 12 books about a young woman this is so on brand for this recommendation, a young woman in 19th century England who stows away on a Navy ship and then becomes sort of a pirate / business owner / gender non-conforming bisexual hellion across Europe. And she like fights with Napoleon, and she's painted by Goya, and just sort of like works her way in and out of all these different historical adventures, and has like, it's such a great like trophy series, and has also like the greatest slow burn romance of all time that or it's not slow burn, it's like they're constantly apart from each other because anyways, doesn't matter. Point is, why I really like Jackie is there's a lot of like pieces of her character that I relate to, in the sense that she's sort of very audacious, but also very cowardly, and very sort of aware of her own cowardice, and aware of how hard she is on her friends and the people around her, and how much she asks of other people. But also she's really like, she is kind of labelless and kind of, she sort of defies, like I wouldn't even know how to give her a real label for either her gender identity or her sexuality. And I think she would prefer it that way. And I find that the older I get, the more I sort of feel like I've eschewed labels too. And I think it's very helpful when you're first sort of coming into yourself to be able to have a word and say, okay, this is me. I'm in this section of the alphabet, essentially. And then the older I get, the more that I find that words are just sort of ways to divide us. And they're ways to make us less empathetic a lot of the time. And this is like, if you have a label that you love, like please use that label and embrace it and put it on all your Twitter bio. And I love that. But for me, I just find that labels have become sort of limiting, so that we use them as excuses to not have empathy for each other. So it's, oh, this person or this character is asexual and I'm bisexual, aromantic, so I can't relate to them because that experience isn't mine. When I think there's so much more we all have in common within the LGBTQ community that we need to focus on rather than what divides us. So part of why I really like Jackie is because she is a character that doesn't have a label, and there isn't sort of a big conversation about her sexuality in the book. It's just something that like exists as part of her. Oh, that was long. Sorry.
No, fine.
Thank you for the recommendation, though. I dig it.
Yeah, I was like, I thought you said Slytherin romance at first, and I was like, what was that?
Oh no, I just shut off. I'm wearing pajama bottoms. I'm gonna keep only my top half in for you.
But I love all the answers, especially when talking about what kind of femininity meant growing up. I was always a big Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan, and I was somebody who also like I really loved how like, you know, she can go kick some butt and then come in and like care about dressing up for prom. Like it was okay to like those things, because I think a lot of us deal with like things with femininity being taught to be hated growing up, like, you know, girls like this band, so you can't because girls are like stupid for liking a band. So
well, then you get into the conversation of like the way we what's the word? I haven't talked to people. I haven't talked to humans in a while. I'm not feeling super articulate. But like the way we then like hate on gay men who, because they want to emulate things that are traditionally feminine, and that's like a sign of weakness. And it's a whole like rabbit hole you could go down about the way we think of emasculation as being like the worst possible thing a man can do. There's this great, sorry, I have 1,000 places right now. There's this great interview with Cameron Esposito and Rhea Butcher when they were doing the show Take My Wife on NPR, where they're talking to the host, who I think it's Ari Shapiro, one of the gay NPR hosts. And he was talking about how after he got married, for a long time, he had a really hard time using the word husband to describe his partner. And he sort of unpacked why that is. And he said it's because he realized that in saying like this is my husband, that makes me the wife in the relationship. And that's the sort of like, that's the secondary, that's the subservient, that's the, like, I don't want to be a lesser person in this relationship. And that's so many levels of messed up, but it's just sort of how we're conditioned to think. This is a whole other conversation. I'm sorry. Get back to your question.
You need to send that to us after. I want to listen.
I have to find it. It's just like, it was a weird little blip where he was like interviewing them and they were doing a sound check. And then the sound check turned into this like 10-minute, really interesting conversation about, I gotta find, I'll find it and I'll
Perfect.
One of my favorite things ever. And I need to find it anyway. Just if for no other reason than to make sure I'm citing the right host.
You know, one of those gay NPR people. You know.
Google. Let's see what pulls up for that. Okay, so what are some ways you feel that the queer community have been misrepresented in books?
What a question.
We are on a time-based video.
Yeah, right.
What?
I think that there are like many ways that queer people have been like misrepresented and poorly represented in works, but I used to love to kind of call these out, and I think they are fun to call out from time to time, but what I've sort of learned is that like there's sort of a person for every experience, and instead of critiquing poor representation, I tend to find that I'm more put in the spot of critiquing like overrepresentation and sort of who gets that like the hegemonic say in like what the queer experience is like. So I tend to find that like, I mean, I know within the reaction to like Reverie, for instance, Kane is this like very prickly and like somewhat ambitious and like selfish young queer boy. And a lot of the people that read him were like, I have never known a gay to act like this, because they're so used to that like consumable, like kind of like flirty gay best friend commodity that has been like sort of like the Kurt Hummels, right, from like Glee, like that kind of character. But I refrain from saying that those people have no value, because like I'm Kurt Hummel, right? Like that's me. That was me in high school, and like seeing Kurt Hummel like meant a lot for me. But it just set a tone for like what a queer teen could be, like specifically like a cis white queer guy, right? Like, and that's what they all sort of turned into thereafter, or at least that's what we saw a lot of. And so I don't know. I tend to back away from being like that's bad representation and more talking about like this is overrepresented. There should be sort of more room for other people like this. And if a character is not, you know, taking the female heroine shopping and like listening to her like ponder texts from boys, like they're not being any less gay than like, you know, I was in high school. And I was very gay in high school. So I know that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Co-sign everything you just said. And I think it's also, we've moved into a place where the danger of that single story that you talk about has now become, I think, almost the danger of, like, I don't know how to say this without being like, my story is the only story, because I see so many book reviews, not just of my own books, but of other books that say, well, I am bisexual and this character is bisexual and their relationship with their sexuality is very different than mine. Therefore, it's not realistic or it's problematic or inauthentic. When I think just in general, we need to give people more space to be individuals and have their own individual relationship with their gender and with their sexuality, and to understand that none of us are going to be perfect in that relationship. I think we're so hard on ourselves, and that transfers over to we're so hard on our queer characters. As much as we say that we love and want to see them, then as soon as they show up, we're like, okay, but you're like Ryan said, you're like the wrong kind of gay. And I think that's really like, I think it's really difficult, and it's really damaging. And we need to, yeah, exactly what Ryan said, more room for the queer experience. I would also add too, in history, the thing that I think is it's starting to open up a little bit more, but I'm really ready to start seeing queer historical narratives that are more than just like, you get to be the sad butler in Downton Abbey that like lurks on the side the whole time, because we have evidence and we have stories now of queer people in history. And I say now, we've always had them, but like they're actually starting to be shared and come more to light and things like that. But we have these stories of queer people in history who prove that as long as there have been people, there have A, been queer people, and B, there have been happy queer people who have been in relationships and like had wonderful open lives with the people they loved. And I think when we talk about the queer experience in history, we talk about it very broad stroke. And we say, you know, it was always terrible to be queer until Rent came out. when really like the reality is that the queer experience in history is as varied as if we were talking about the queer experience in America today. And we know that if you're talking about being queer in America, your experience is going to be very depending on your race, your religion, your gender identity, your socioeconomic, what's the word? Socioeconomic situation.
Status.
Yeah.
Status.
Like there's so many things that go into it, even just like your immediate community of people who live around you and your family, like all of these things go into it. And we don't allow the same sort of individuality and personhood when we talk about the queer experience in history. So in general, I would just really like to see less like sad queer characters in history and more like happy, openly in relationships. And I mean, I think that's another conversation. Yeah, that's my thing, is I just want to see us start breaking stereotypes, because as much as the We Need Diverse Books movement is great and has so taken off, it really hasn't hit historical fiction in a lot of ways. Historical fiction is largely still very white and very cisgendered and very straight. And I'm really ready for all of those things to be done.
I applaud you. Please do more.
Definitely co-sign all of that from both of you. Those are some really great points. And just, you know, overall, I think we need so much more intersectionality in, you know, queer representation in YA, in everything. We need to see how different faiths interact with queerness, how race interacts with queerness. There's so many layers to absolutely everything. And, you know, from my own experience, I feel like I don't see enough of the messy overlapping of gender and sexuality. I feel like we see a lot of books that are just like, this is the G, this is the B, this is the L. And I'm like, I'm non-binary and I'm mostly attracted to femme people, but like it's messy. And what does it all mean? And there are no words that actually encompass these things. And it's just a much stranger experience than I think we sometimes make it out to be with really simple letter designations. And I also think that this intersection of gender and of femininity, specifically with queerness, has come out in a very strange way in YA fiction, especially. Like, you know, we get this like danger of a single story of, you know, for so long it was like the butch lesbian was the stereotype, but where's the butch lesbian in YA fiction? Like,
yes, I was waiting for the butch
like,
lesbian.
It was so much a stereotype that everyone was like, well, I'm not going to do that because that's a stereotype. But like, can we have some butch lesbians in YA fiction, please? There are a few. I don't want to say there are none. There are a few, and there are some great books out there. But I think sometimes we get so afraid of stepping into into something that we think is a stereotype that we forget that is actually, you know, part of some people's experiences. And it would have been so powerful for me to see butch queer people, you know, on the pages of books when I was a teen. It would have been just life-changing.
I'm with you 100%. Like with like, we sort of back away from stereotypes because even as like queer creators, we don't necessarily want to add those in, right? Because we're like furthering like a narrative. That's all there is. But like, that's why part of when I was writing Kane, like he's not like, I feel like, okay, let me back up. I feel like a lot of like the queer characters that show up in like media nowadays, like they, especially for like queer men, they sort of like compensate their flamboyance. Like they'll have black nail polish on, but the second that like someone's like, wait, he's gay, he'll like punch his like hand through a wall and be like, yeah, what's it to you? Like it's always like that exchange, which is why when I was writing Kane, like I really wanted to write like a total sissy, like someone, like I wanted to write the most like bent wristed, like, oh my god, hi baby, look at this puppy.
Hi.
Oh my god.
Sorry, you were saying such good things. Ignore.
No, that's fine. I basically, like when I took Kane, I like was like, I'm not going to back away from like sort of my natural inclinations to like what this is, because I wanted to give someone power that you wouldn't necessarily give like the hero's mantle to, and I wanted to show like heroics as acted out by someone that's not super strong, super brave. Even today, someone tagged me in a review and was like, I didn't like this book because Kane cried twice in the first 8 chapters, and then he was crying again when I put it down. And I was like, yes, I'm crying now reading this. Like, and I'm 29 years old. Like, I was just so like, I'm not upset about things like that. It's just so funny to me because it's like, oh, like you're showing me all of your cards right now that like you can't take a queer character crying because it sort of sits very snugly in like this uncomfortable perception that you have of like queer people, that they can't be powerful if they're being gay or if they're being like stereotypical, because you read weakness into those stereotypes. Like that's very much what Kane's meant to do. He literally throws rainbows from his hands. Like there's no getting around the, like he's literally Rainbow Bright with like a BB gun. So like I don't mince words about it. I'm like, he's like a total like sissy, and it's important that he wins. And that's the exchange of that book.
And that even feeds into the whole thing of saying that crying makes you weak and not a good
Right.
And that's so toxic.
The idea of having
toxic, yeah.
Being in touch with your emotions, expressing those emotions is inherently a feminine trait, which makes it inherently weak.
So misogynistic. Yeah, it's not good.
I also think the part of the problem is and I think we do this with queer people too in real life and not just in books, is that we want them to be perfect representation, because there's so few of them. You want them to be perfect representations of queerness and of their community and just like of people in general. And that's something I hear about Monty a lot of the time, is like he's not a great human, like for most of the book. 90%. He's not a great person. And like Ryan, you referenced Ryan, which direction are you? with your villain, that now it's like, well, I mean, yes, that's been a problem. The stereotype of queer villains has been a problem for a long time, but now I feel like every time I write a queer character, I'm like, oh, I can't make them too mean. I can't make them too villainous, because because they have to be perfect, and they have
can't
to
all be
great.
cinnamon rolls.
Yeah, they can be real people, which is, I mean, what we do to queer people too. We say you have to be a perfect representation of your community at all times, and of just like personhood at all times, and be as unobjectionable as possible to be permitted to exist, along with like the top tier humans or the top tier normals or whatever.
The top tier normals. I love that.
So yeah, it's yeah, Monty's a huge pain in the butt.
Yeah.
That was one of my big fears with writing Diz, is just she is like hard to swallow. Like she is not.
Some people are like that though.
Well, then
you just want to shake her and be like, open your mouth and say words.
Well, when you add women into the conversation too, my God, the things Monty gets away with that Felicity does the exact same, and people are like, mm-mm. Or I was on Tumblr earlier because I didn't want to be working, and there was some post about like, why don't we ever see women in that sort of archetype of like the cocky like Han Solo rogue scoundrel kind of character, and someone commented and were like, you do, they just get called bitches. Like that's why people don't write those characters, is because we don't allow women to be that way without labeling them. And I keep going on about this, but I think you have more questions for us.
Yeah, this is a big topic.
We kind of hit little pieces of a bunch of them, so now I'm like, oh gosh, I'm not prepared anymore. Our next question was, how do you write queer characters without pigeonholing them into queer stereotypes? So does anyone have anything else on that subject? Because we could talk about it some more.
I think that when I bristle with stereotypes, it's because I understand them to be convenient to the author and they're uninterrogated. I don't think stereotypes, for a lot of reasons, are like the worst thing. I think oftentimes, like when speaking specifically about like queer men, right, like the sissiness or like that kind of like dark humor that like drag queens have, like a drag queen without that dark humor would be kind of odd to me, because that's oftentimes like very typical of like those performances. But I would ask that people kind of go the step further and ask the why, right? Like, you're spending so much time and so many words on this character. How come you're not sort of sitting with, you know, where they got this dark humor, or sort of what pain informs it? Or if it's like, you know, like here I'll give you an example. Like, let's say you do have like the Kurt Hummel, right? Like he's effeminate, he like loves to shop and gossip. Like, you can't just throw that in there and not ask yourself like why a character's like that. Like, does it have to do with the fact that a lot of like young queer men have to find a way to ingratiate themselves with like beautiful women to shield themselves from aggressive male? Like, is that part of it, right? Like, is that part of why that character acts that way? So I don't necessarily like shy away from stereotypes, but I do ask that people consider kind of what they're adding into the character that they're creating, and not just simply use it as a crutch because it's convenient to kind of prop together, you know, a character that they're considering diverse.
And I think we confuse stereotypes with being inherently problematic, which they're not. They are when they are, like you said, Ryan, when they're, I'm just going to point over my shoulder at you. they become problematic when, like you said, they're uninterrogated, or where they exist simply because an author is using this kind of lazy shorthand, or not interrogating sort of these tropes that we have been inundated with for so long. But that doesn't mean that a stereotype is an inherently problematic thing. I think what MK said about about like not seeing butch lesbians in YA is exactly like, it's a perfect example of that. Is everyone's now so, I just pulled an enormous piece of dog hair out of my shoe. Sorry. Everyone's so like afraid now of playing into stereotypes, and that word has become such a dirty word that we ignore. We ignore people and we leave narratives out. Then I don't know. Stereotypes are a complicated thing that I grapple with a lot as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything really to add that we haven't already kind of spun over to death, but it's so much like writing any other character that, you know, queer people are whole people, and the real magic of a character is always in the specific details. Yeah.
It's like queer people are whole people, which is totally true, and that we are people beyond our sort of sexual identity. But I think it's also important to recognize that, like, when you are sort of a societal outsider in a lot of ways, but like as a queer person, there is no part of your life that identity doesn't intersect with and doesn't touch, isn't influenced by that. And so you sort of have to, it's a complicated balance, because you sort of have to allow your characters to be more than just their identity, while simultaneously recognizing that their identity informs everything in their life. It's hard.
I think that's very well said. Yeah.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
Stupid. I hate this job.
All right, perfect. So kind of spinning off of that, what resources or advice would you recommend to other authors to create authentic characters in the LGBTQ community?
I think there's just no substitute for consuming queer media created by queer people, you know, whether that is TV shows, books, movies, whatever it is. There's no substitute for going straight to the source.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that, like, media is the source, but so are actual people, right? Like, you likely are surrounded by people, either incognito or otherwise every day, that could be your, you know, greatest resources when trying to understand points of view and walks of life that are not necessarily your own. If you are queer, like, great, you've got an advantage craft-wise. Not that I would ever really call, like, daily suffering an advantage, but, like, from a craft perspective, like, you do have your own life to mine when writing your identity, and you absolutely should not feel inhibited when doing that. But, you know, if you're looking to write outside of your lane, but still within sort of the realm of queer people, like, we tend to travel in packs, right? Like, the rainbow flag is all joined together, and I know that, like, my group of queer friends, like, tons of diversity in it. And if I've got a question, I go to them first, and I've developed relationships with them so that, you know, I'm not necessarily looking to exploit their experience. I'm looking to learn more about it so that I can make sure that I'm not doing harm to a teen reader that picks up my book and sees somebody that's like them, that's not necessarily the main character, but still matters for the story. I think we're sort of our greatest resources in that respect.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And co-signing both of those things, but especially, like, there's so much focus on seeing yourself in stories, which is so important. But also, I think we need to focus on the windows aspect of mirrors and windows. So make sure that if you're seeking out any kind of media, like queer media or otherwise, you're not just looking for yourself in stories, but you're looking for other people and looking for other stories, and looking to learn and deepen your empathy for others and deepen your understanding to the extent that you can of someone else's experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we haven't hit this one yet. What up and coming queer books are you excited about?
Any up and coming queer book is my short answer, because that's all I care about.
That is
but I
not
did
helping us put stuff on our TBRs.
I did tweet about this earlier, and so if you're curious, I tweeted about it just to see what people started recommending. I'm not going to redo the list, but I will find a few favorites off of it.
I'm pulling up Goodreads.
Yeah, I'm pulling up a list. I definitely have to shout out The Summer of Everything by Julian Winters, because Julian Winters is wonderful.
Incredible. Oh, incredible.
And Fragile Remedy by Maria Mora is coming out.
I'm about to read that. I'm so
shortly.
excited.
I'm so excited. I have the arc sitting on my table side right now. And
It's in my Kindle. I'm excited.
There's so few like sort of sci-fi fantasy mashup kind of things out there. So I'm really excited for it from both a queer perspective and a genre smashy perspective.
Yeah.
Fragile Remedy was the one where their blood was, it had to do with a virus, right? And like
it's
it's
got
some sort of epidemic.
it's got the like pink flame. Is that the one?
No, it's a blue cover, blue and silver, right?
I think
It has like a vial on the front.
It does
I think
have
that's
a vial
great. I
on the
feel like
front.
that's Grave Maidens.
No, I think Fragile Remedy has one too.
Oh no, you're right. You're right. It does.
Flux publishes it, I think.
For Fragile Remedy, I think it's that there's like a certain class of people that are sort of raised to almost be like organ harvests for wealthier people, but it definitely has a vial on the cover for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, someone took my answer. I was going to say Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas.
It's so
but
good.
yeah, I'm very excited about that. That's what I was going to say.
I'm going to shout out a couple that are not well, one upcoming and then a bunch that have just come out. So people, I work in a bookstore, and so my idea of like what a new book is so skewed. Where I'll like tell my parents, I'm like, oh, that book is super old. It came out like a month ago, and they're like, we're still reading Tolstoy. So so the upcoming one that I'm really excited about is The Boy in the Red Dress. Whew, that totally changes the premise. Which is about it's kind of like Maisie Dobbs or like Miss Fisher in the 1920s in New Orleans with like this like drag queen speakeasy and a murder, and it's like a fun tropey historical novel full of queer people and people of color, which I love. Also, I shouted out her earlier, but I think she's just really brilliant, is Cameron Esposito. Her sort of memoir came out earlier this month called Save Yourself, and it's really great, and it's a really interesting look at the intersection of a lot of the things we've been talking about. Similar is Daniel Mallory Ortberg's book, Something That May Shock and Discredit You, just came out and is brilliant, and such a brilliant way of sort of labellessly looking at gender. And I think Daniel is one of the greatest writers operating today on so many levels. I was such a fan of The Toast, and it's just such a spot on, brilliant piece of writing. Also, Upright Women Wanted by Sarah Gailey just came out, which I've been recommending left and right because it's the really short little novella about this sort of post-apocalyptic Wild West where queer librarians save the world, which I'm very into. And then my last recommendation that I cannot stop talking about is Gideon the Ninth by Tamara Moore.
So good.
Lesbian necromancers in space, and it's just a book. I was furious the whole way through that I would never write anything that good.
And the
I
audio,
haven't read it yet. I'm very excited about that.
So the audiobook is awesome. I do mostly audiobooks for reading, which is why I'm kind of terrible at reading ARCs because they don't have audiobooks. But the audiobook is done by the same woman who did the audiobook for Ladies Guide. And so it was very disorienting a few times that I would be listening to it. And I was like, wait, that's Joanna.
because those accents.
I'm like, why is she murdering people?
Oh, that reminds me. Bonds of Brass by Emily Skrutsky just came out, and that also had the same
We love
narrator
Emily.
for the audiobook as the Disasters, which was just such a delightful surprise. And it was a great book, but also a great audiobook, very well performed.
Yeah.
I also have to shout out This Coven Won't Break by Isabel Sterling, which is the sequel to These Witches Won't Burn.
Yeah.
There we go. Yes, which I loved, and I'm really excited for the sequel. And then Girl Serpent Thorn by Melissa Bashardost. I'm never gonna say that right, but it's the person who wrote Girls Made of Snow and Glass, which wrecked me, and I loved it. So I'm really excited for this unrelated follow-up.
And for fans of These Witches Don't Burn and This Coven Won't Break, which are like two of my favorite titles ever, there's a book coming out called The Scapegracers by Hannah Abigail Clark. That is, I just got sent an archive, and I'm deeply excited about it. It is like lesbian witch coven, and I'm very into it just based on the blurb on the back.
There is one There is one that I just finished that the main character isn't queer, but it was very like all the topics that we were talking about with femininity, and they had very good supporting characters. And it was, I can't remember the full title, MK. Yes, The Life in Medieval Times. That was absolutely incredible. I went in thinking I was getting like Renaissance romance, and I came out like completely like in love with that book and like all the topics that it touched on with like gender roles and things like that. I mean, Kit is a badass, and like everyone should read that book.
It is great. It is written by a dear friend of mine who deserves your love and support. Please check out that book.
I'm so excited. And I got her little sticker that says "Joust like a girl," which is my new favorite piece of book swag anyone's ever made. And I had it at the bookstore. I got it like at the bookstore, and I was just walking around holding it because I was holding my mail. And literally every person who was in the bookstore was like, well, now I want to read that. So with one piece of swag, the entire bookstore wants to read that book now. So
amazing.
Okay, so now we've got a question for each of you about your own books. MK, you're first. So we've heard that you're a fan of tabletop RPGs. So do you ever use RPGs as a writing aid or to pull inspiration for your own unique storylines?
Definitely. Not always in a super active way, but I have definitely gotten a lot of my book ideas like at the gaming table mid session. You know, I will have to suddenly like drop everything and just be like, don't talk to me for a second because I have an idea. So not so much for plot ideas, but I do get lots of interesting setting ideas and character ideas. And I, for some reason, can't not write ensemble casts. I have not figured out how to not do that yet. So
we're okay with that.
Yeah, don't mess with it.
I always end up sort of building them like an RPG party. I'm like, all right, I need my mage and I need my warrior, and like, what are my roles that I'm filling?
That's how I'm going to start selling people on your books, is saying it's like having your RPG. What do you call it? Clan?
It's yeah. I mean, it's like having
it's like a campaign. Yeah, campaign.
That's the best analog for your books I've ever heard.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, that's perfect. Now the challenge is for people to actually use your book as a campaign.
And make a campaign, yeah.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah.
Somebody write that.
Now is the time. Someone get that written.
Get on
I can play that, but I don't have time to write one.
Okay, Brett.
Ryan, the next one is for you. A reverie is a phenomenon that warps reality in which a person's subconscious dreams or fantasies manifest as a fantastical world around them. They're extremely dangerous and have to be unraveled. What was young Ryan's reverie, and how would current Ryan unravel it?
This is like, I feel like I'm going to be institutionalized shortly after answering this.
Therapy.
That is a little invasive, I'll admit. But no,
we're not asking for any dark things happening.
Yeah. You're lucky I've had most of my rosé at this point. Look, this is actually, I know I'm being like funny about this, but my answer is sort of serious, but like, it's weird because I am now in the position that I wasn't, 2 or 3 years ago, where I am sort of living out the life that I so desperately wanted for myself as a young queer kid. And I was completely fueled by daydreams. They were the reason that I sort of would keep going for many of the harder times of my life. And when I thought of what I wanted to be, I wanted to be, an eccentric person sort of cooped up in their world of like hijinks. I basically wanted to be Hal from Howl's Moving Castle. Like, that's who I had in mind, like him in that room full of like spinning gyroscopes and crystals and just like bedridden because someone ruined his hair dye. Like, I saw that life and I so badly wanted that for myself. And I told myself, I'm going to make sure that I stick around until I have that. And that's what kind of kept me anchored to reality for a lot. And so I am in that life now. Like, I do feel like I am sort of interacting with like this weird like childish daydream of mine that's now sort of become this coat that I can wear and take off and sort of travel around in, that's kept me warm all these years. And I don't think I would unravel it. I'm so grateful that I get like the opportunity to like write queer stories for queer kids and queer readers and queer adults and sort of talk about these things. And actually a big part of Reverie is that like, yeah, they're dangerous because reveries trap people in them, but a point of it is that they're also very necessary to keep people going, and that if you destroy someone's reverie, you in effect destroy them. So I wouldn't unravel my life.
I love that the whole Howl reference. Like, you stay that.
Yeah, no, I love it. Very formative for me.
Let that
Can you
cat
show your gyroscopes and crystals now, please?
I have many. Look, you probably can't see them, but like literally, you can't see this. But I'm surrounded by like a bunch of eggs that I've been bedazzling, and like this is like what I'm up to these days. Like I'm not far off from.
Do you have your submarine?
Oh, the submarine. Yeah, the submarine's over there. But yeah, it's slightly out of reach. But yeah, it's here.
Perfect. Okay. Mackenzie. Okay, so you touched on this earlier. Me and Brittany were laughing like, oh man, she's not going to have the question. But I think that's room for it. So we often hear the excuse for not including queer and diverse characters in historical fiction because it's not historically accurate, and we know that's not true.
Right.
So can you talk about some of your research on this subject and some of the real life stories you found to inspire characters like Monty and Percy?
For literally 3 hours, I could.
I'm ready.
I'm like, where do we even start? We live in a great, wonderful moment where so many of these stories that have been previously lost are becoming accessible again. And sometimes they have been lost because like the Victorians burned everybody's gay journals. And sometimes they've been lost. And sometimes they've been lost because like we as people now who study history are so much more comfortable just repeating these stories we've always heard and repeating the same narratives we've always heard, as opposed to like challenging them and allowing diverse narratives to enter those. So I did a ton of research on queer people in history and queer people in specifically queer men in 18th century England. And my favorite statistic is that there were more gay bars in 18th century London than there were in 1950s London. And there was like a very vibrant queer scene and like a queer party scene. But at the same time, then you also have people like Anne Lister, who's one of my favorite examples, who is now the subject of a very popular television show called Gentleman Jack, which is fantastic and you should all watch it. In which you have like a woman, a person, I don't know what pronouns she would have used if she were alive today, who was spending a lot of her life like cross-dressing and courting women, but also was kind of just like a reclusive business owner who liked hanging out at home. And so I like that I tried really hard to find sort of a spectrum of stories across history in the same way we were talking about trying to find a spectrum of the queer experience today. There's a great historian named Richter Norton who's written a ton on sexuality in the 18th century, and I read so much of his stuff. And he has a wonderful, wonderful collection of letters that you can read online that's called My Dear Boy, and it's all queer love letters throughout history, and it's all men, which is not my most favorite thing. It's all cis guys writing to each other, or cis as far as we know. But it's really fantastic and lovely and romantic, and I really enjoy those letters. But also I think too that we use the excuse of, we couldn't have known, they didn't have the vocabulary. And I did that for a long time, where I was like, you can't possibly call that person a lesbian. They didn't have the words to call themselves a lesbian, so that's not fair. When like in reality, they might not have had the words, but all the signals are still there, and it's like everything but. And you have people like Anne Lister who are writing in their journals like, I love only the fair sex and desire no affection, but there's like, yeah, it's really hard to read around that one. And yet we've been doing it for a long time. So I think so much of it is just like, is not just finding these stories, but now us as readers and writers and historians and people who just like exist in a space that has been influenced by history, allowing these stories to become part of our collective unconsciousness, and vowing to be, I talk about this with women's history a lot too, is sort of also like vowing to be the last generation that has to go find these stories and introduce them into the canon. We have to keep them in our canon and keep them in our consciousness. So there are tons of stories about queer people in history. I mentioned Anne Lister. She's one of my favorites. Loma Pan, who was this like flamboyant bisexual opera singer in the 1400s. I always forget when she was. She's like wonderfully fun to read about. She like joined the nunnery at one point to be with this woman, and then like burned the nunnery down. There's lots of like trans men in history that I really enjoy reading about, like Charlie Pinkhurst, who was one-eyed stagecoach driver in the Old West. Also, James Barrie, who was a topic of some controversy earlier last year, I believe, because there's a book coming out about him that misgenders him, but he was a very, very prominent British doctor at the time who now would probably have identified as a trans man. There's like people like even like modern history. I'm thinking of like Dorothy Arzner, who was one of the first directors in Hollywood that was a woman, and who did this like incredible feminist cinema at a time when it was like the most boysy boys club, but also was openly queer and has lots of sort of queer undertones in her work. And there's so many stories out there. I just want like it, and I love that people know some of our sort of modern queer icons, like, you know, like Freddie Mercury and Bowie and Ellen and people like that. And like those people are great, but I would encourage people to go back further and to try and find these stories further back in history, because for me anyway, so much of my own identity has been formed by learning my history and learning that sort of we are not the first generation of queer people to exist. I would encourage people to go back and find these stories, because people like you have existed as long as there have been people, and so many of these and lots of it. Sorry, I'm going on so long.
You're totally fine.
No, you're fine.
We've also not just been like, they're also not hidden stories. We have like queer people have been accepted and open in lots of societies. Progress is not a thing that just like slowly gets better. It's something that's always better and worse and different depending on where you are and what society you're in and who you are. And so like there are places in history where queer people were like very out and very open and very respected as part of their community. And so like find those, because it's always kind of exciting, and it's like finding Themyscira to be like, look, back in this time period, there were gay people and they were on pots and in paintings and nobody said anything. Like, so yeah, go back, find your history. It's out there. You just have to look for it a little bit.
Perfect. All right.
So long. I really could like that's.
I loved it.
No, you're okay. We kind of knew. That's why we asked. We knew.
Please.
We wanted to know. So.
The whole live stream is just Mackenzi talking about queer people in history and only knowing about half the details of their life.
We'll send you an email and schedule that one. So kind of to wrap this up, I've got one last question, and it's for everyone. MK, when we were emailing back and forth,
I have to open the door.
Okay.
Oh, someone's. Okay, that's Mackenzi.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that was me.
I don't know if you can hear Queenie.
No more dog.
Just wants to know I'm here.
Back when we were emailing back and forth to kind of set everything up and get scheduling worked out, they mentioned that their book, The Disasters, that the Disasters applied, and this one point kind of stood out to me, and it kind of applied to everybody's book, so I decided to turn it into a question. All three of you have books that have aspects of joyfulness and hope, which I think we can all agree is something that everyone can use right about now. Can you each tell us what morals or little pieces that you'd like for people to take back from reading your books at this point in time?
I think this came out more in Spellhacker than in the Disasters, but just that there is so much more going on beneath the surface of a person than what you will ever know and ever see. And that even behaviors or sort of like outward signals that might seem difficult on the outside usually have some kind of like deep wound underneath. And so just kindness and empathy towards your fellow humans goes so far, because you just never know what other people are going through, or what's in their past, or what has informed the kind of person that they have become, or that they have come to be. And this is 100% informed by what a garbage human I was early in life. So I have so much more kindness and empathy that I wish I could go back and show that person now that I like myself a lot better and know more about life and other humans. Therapy's great, y'all. I recommend it.
I'll have to try it out. I'm just kidding. I'm very deeply in therapy.
We all.
Yeah, exactly.
Mackenzi, did you want to go? I'm still thinking.
I think
Is
she's
Mackenzie
frozen.
frozen? She's smiling so pleasantly.
Oh my god.
Oh, there she is.
Uh-oh. Hold on.
No warning. Am I back?
Hey!
You're just like frozen smiling at us, so we didn't know.
Yeah, we didn't know. Oh, that's
Glitch in the
good.
matrix.
I have an answer. Hold on. The question's around morality. What moral people should take from your book, right?
Mhm.
I think specifically on like the topic of joy, I think that there's like such a joy and such a power in like finding your people. A big part of Kane's journey in Reverie is that he actually begins the book with no memory of kind of like who he is or like what he means to the people that are like telling him that they're his friends and his teammates because something bad happens to him off the pages. And that's sort of where the book begins. But as a result, like he's extremely insulated naturally as a person, but doesn't have anybody in his head with him and kind of believes a very bad narrative about like where his life is going. And as he kind of recreates these friendships, he becomes a lot more attached to the world. And I think that that's like a really powerful thing because, you know, it is hard to fight a battle when you are the only person fighting it and when you're so like insulated underneath like your dreams of what the world could be. But ultimately, as you like connect with other people, find other people that are like you, have the same goals or the same identities or even the same like, you know, traumas. I think there's a lot of power in figuring out like what you can do together. And I think that's what Kane ultimately figures out because I think it's the thing that like kind of keeps him going after his own goals, his own sort of like selfish desires aren't enough to kind of fuel his adventure.
Right.
I love that. Now that you've said that, I'm suddenly realizing that that is a big theme in both of my books. So
Yes.
making me just realize that just this very second is that there is so much power in finding your people and the people you fit together with. And both of them are big found family books. And I just think especially as queer people, that is such a powerful experience. So yes, that's what you said.
Mackenzie,
are you real now?
Sorry, yeah, I'm so sorry. I dropped my phone. In terms of what I want people to walk away with, definitely similar to what MK said about like I think as a teenager, I remember becoming aware of the fact that everyone in my life was not just sort of like a supporting character in my narrative, and the fact that they had lives and they had pain and deep wounds and all sorts of things that were completely separate from me and that were no less real and valid because of that. And so everything MK said about empathy and developing understanding that other people feel things too, and other people are hurt in both the same ways and different ways than you is very much a part of Gentleman's Guide. And also just I'll reiterate what I already said, which is just like I want people to know that queer people have existed forever, and specifically that happy queer people have existed forever, and your queer history does not have to be imprisonment and execution and sad celibacy and loveless marriages. Like your queer history is full of people who loved each other and who were able to be open and truthful about who they were and were not persecuted for it or hated for it. And I just want I so badly want especially queer teen readers to know that they have been a part of history forever and they have not been on the fringes of it, and that they come from a long, rich, storied history of people like them who have lived like incredible, full, happy lives.
I love that. I love that. It was wonderful.
Wow, ending this like a Hallmark movie. But thank you guys so much for being with us this evening. We've loved having you. We've been like panicking all the way up to here. We're like, oh my God, we love them so much. So now that we've gotten through this, we can wipe the sweat off of our palms. But
you did wonderful. Thank you so much.
No, thank you guys. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm going out. Bye, guys. Milady. Yeah.
But we will have this uploaded for anyone who missed out. We know we got a lot of conflicting time zones and everything, but otherwise go follow these amazing authors, get their books. It's so amazing. And yeah, Thank y'all guys so much for
Thank you.
having me.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.